I'm George Calys. I'll be conducting the 2021 Sea Ranch Candidates Forum. The forum is a privately produced event by me and White Barn Press. I want to emphasize to everyone that the forum is not an official event of the Sea Ranch Association, the Board of Directors, or the elections committees. The statements that you hear from candidates are solely their own opinions, and in this forum we make no representation as to the accuracy of any candidate's statements. We'll attempt to question or get candidates to elaborate if we hear something that we're not quite sure of, but these are each candidate's own opinions. This video will be provided to Sea Ranchers as a video which you can view at your leisure and pause and start it as you wish. The association will provide a link, plus we'll be providing a link via social media, so look for that. That being said, let me introduce the candidates, and this is in no particular order. This is how they appear on my screen, so we'll just go that way. Scott Nevin is running. Scott, hold your hand up or wave to everyone. Thank you, Scott. I see Chris Japp. Chris, if you'll acknowledge. Ray Rizavi, if you'll give us a wave, Ray, thank you. Manuel Alonso Martinez. Manuel, if you'll give a raise, thank you. And Gina Hubble. Thank you. Those are our 5 candidates for the 2021 Sea Ranch Board of Directors election. Let's review a couple of ground rules and then we will get going. This is directed towards the candidates. Courtesy and respect for the other candidates, I'm asking you to show during this forum. You as candidates are free to disagree with one another, but differing opinions need to be expressed in a civil fashion. Personal attacks won't be tolerated, and as the moderator, I may choose to mute any candidate if I think something is out of line. I don't expect any of that, but I just wanted to say it. I'm going to give each of you candidates 2 minutes up front to introduce yourselves, give us a little background on yourself, your experience, and your qualifications. Perhaps why you're running for board or what you think you bring to the board. I'd ask you to keep that to 2 minutes because we've got 5 of us. At that point, I'll direct questions to your candidates. I'll read the question, I'll recognize candidates, I'll give each one of you an opportunity to respond to the question. If any of you want to challenge or add something to another candidate, please use the raise hand function and I will recognize you. Once again, because of Zoom and how this works, let's don't interrupt each other. At the end of the forum, I'll give you each a minute or 2 to make a summary comment about anything that you think is important for Sea Ranchers to learn about you at the end. Any questions? Great. All right, let's begin. I'm going to ask each one of you to take up to 2 minutes. Tell us a bit about yourselves, how long you've been part of the Sea Ranch, why you're running for the board, what experience you have, particularly your experience at Sea Ranch that might make you a good board member. 2 minutes each. Gina, why don't we begin with you?
Okay, sure. As I tried to convey in my first statement, the Sea Ranch has been an integral part of me for all my life, basically. Started coming up here when I was about 12, and we continued to come really as I grew up for almost every vacation that we had. The philosophy and the values that are integral to the Sea Ranch resonated with me even as a child, and I just felt like I was home each time I was here. I purchased a house in 1988, sort of sight unseen. My mom and my aunt actually identified it for me because I had to leave for work to go out of the country. And you know, we've gone up here or up the Sea Ranch every year with my family, so it just sort of became our meeting place. So, you know, as you can see, it's been a long time part of me. Even though I don't currently live at the Sea Ranch, you know, I certainly would be, you know, attending the board meetings once they're in person and spend more time making myself available to members of the association. I believe I guess on the why I could be helpful side, I've worked in financial services basically for over 35 years, primarily in structuring and financial model building. My job was always to sort of figure out the financial aspects, the NPV, if you will, of an investment or taking on risk, primarily for traders or institutional investors. So I've sort of been modeling for a long time, and a lot on sort of asset-based financings was a lot part of it, although we've sort of analyzed corporations and balance sheets for a long time and helping people determine their budgets, their financing strategies, and so forth. You know, I'd very much like to give back to the Sea Ranch. It's given so much to me in the sense of belonging and serenity when I wasn't working and came out to the Sea Ranch, and I also want to experience more of the community of the Sea Ranch.
Thanks, Gina. Manuel, why don't you go next? 2 minutes, please. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, okay. Buenos dias. I also want to acknowledge the Spanish-speaking audience, and I am originally from Spain, so quiero dirigirme a los hispanohablantes que viven en el Rancho del Mar para indicar que la perspectiva que ellos pueden aportar es muy importante para el futuro de esta asociación. All right, so what I just said is like I'm hoping that the Spanish-speaking people, you know, feel like they are included as anyone in the, you know, consensus building and decision making and in the future of this place. Why I am running? Well, I'm an environmentalist. Me and my wife, Martha, she's a nurse, and she's helping some elders with issues here. So she's very interested in the health of our community. And also I met her when she was a whale researcher. And so we both share that love for nature. And we came here, we first got a long-term rental, and then we ended up purchasing a house a couple of years ago, and we live here near the airport. I have a sod roof house that I love, and it's built by this great architect, and we have passive solar heating. So it's just a dream come true for us. And we have become attached to the land and to the people and to this idea of living not on the land, but with the land. I think that, you know, this conversation with the land and this way that why we're all here, type of like, you know, attracted to that sense of unspoiled nature, well-managed commons and forests and beaches and all that. So we just became captivated by this place. And now my skills, I'm currently running a nonprofit organization. I'm a director of Earth Team. It's an environmental education organization based in Richmond. And we're working with young people to provide environmental education and stewardship hands-on opportunities. And I think that that's just one of my environmental projects. I've spent my entire life with environmental projects. It's been 25 years in 2 or 3 continents. And I think that I'm really attracted to the Sea Ranch as an environmental school for the future of our children. Demographics are changing here. I see that many people are coming with children and young people. This is the best school that we can have for them. So I think that the preservation of that opportunity for people that either live here now or are planning to come back because they own a lot and they're gonna build or whatever. I just am running because I want to make sure that people can come back to the place they think they're going to come back in the face of all these changes and all these pressures. I think that, you know, we need to protect this place and make sure that we have it here and we preserve the values. So I think putting together my love for this land, my skills of 25 years as a nonprofit administrator, with projects, I think that comes together with my desire to contribute and to help to make this a better place. And it's just for me living with the land lightly, also is living lightly with each other and the community aspects of, lowering polarization, listening to each other, being kind with each other, having a sense of humor. All these things also are part of my concept of living with the land.
Thank you, Manuel. Ray, why don't we, if you'll unmute Ray, we'll let you take a couple of minutes and tell us about yourself and why you might be a good board member.
Thank you, George. My name is Ray Razavi, and I'm a civil engineer registered in California and been working as a civil engineer since 1982. I went to school at Purdue in Indiana, and my family was there. And eventually, the whole family moved out west. Most of them went to Southern California, except my wife, myself, my brother, and my father. We live in Northern California. We love Northern California the most. And especially coming up from the Bay Area north is amazing. Sonoma County and Mendocino County, and being right at the border, it's a really good feeling to be in this part of the world. I've been coming to Sea Ranch since 2005. My friends, they had property here at Sea Ranch, and we stayed with them for a while. And then after that, we rented mostly short-term rentals. And we understood how the short-term rental works and pros and cons. There was only usually two of us, or sometimes my father and my brother would come with us too. So we got to get to know Sea Ranch. And finally, my wife and I decided about a year and 3 days ago, we bought our property at Sea Ranch. And it's been an amazing experience. And gradually, Sea Ranch is one of those places just kind of creeps up on you. In the beginning, it's so subtle. All the design element, all the different efforts that to protect Sea Ranch. You gradually, it takes many, many years for you to understand, oh, this is how they do it. This is why they did this. This is why the design element is this way. As a civil engineer, I was pretty impressed with the infrastructure at Sea Ranch. You really don't find any communities that are separate from a big metropolitan area that has such amazing infrastructure. Water, sewer in the north side where we are, the internet service, the fiber optics, the roadway, the pathways that you have, the coastal trails, the woodlands, the redwoods, the amazing, all the historic heritage trees that you have, Monterey cypresses. We have one on our property, which I'm very fond of. This is an amazing place that the founders have created for us, and I hope that that I can help in any way. My background has been in infrastructure. I've been building roads, sewer treatment plants, collections, water treatment plants, water supply, water distribution, buildings. Been working with the Coastal Commission, with Caltrans, state, federal fish and game. I've been working with biologists, the planning departments to approve projects. I've served probably around 8 cities around the Bay Area as a city engineer or the public works director. I work with the planning departments and the agencies that provide the permits. So if I could help, I mean, we need people like Chris Japp. I mean, he's a young, attorney with all the experience, brilliant. We need people like him. And if I could be as an infrastructure engineer in the background, providing help, I'll be happy to do it. And we need to keep this for the future generations. I mean, the founders created it for us, and we don't have to leave it necessarily for our children or grandchildren, which would be great. But people who are not related to us, but is going to come as a stewards of the land in the future. And if I could be of help, I'll be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Chris, why don't you go ahead and respond? I think you'll need to unmute. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, George. I'd like to start by saying thank you, George, for your efforts in pulling this together. This is a great way to engage with folks who can't be here, whether we're in a pandemic or otherwise. And I really do hope that we continue with a sort of virtual forum format or maybe a hybrid of in-person and virtual going forward. We had over 500 people participate or view the recording last year. Phenomenal. I expect, even more this year, more than we could ever fit in Del Mar. So well done. Thank you, George. My name is Chris Chow. I'm the current chair of the board. I've been serving for 3 years on the board. It's really my pleasure to do so. I really enjoy it. I'm running for re-election because I love this community. All right, I love the natural environment, the ethos, the living lightly on the land, and my friends and neighbors who are here. I mean, this is essentially my home. I split my time between here and San Francisco. For the better part of last year, I've been here for full time, like many other people. When I want to relax, when I want to put work aside, this is where I come. This is what means the most to me, certainly. I would welcome the opportunity to continue serving on the board. That would mean a lot to me. I am fully committed to serving as the best steward as I can for this community. As I said in my candidate statement, I think the board's role is really to protect and prepare the community for future generations. We're only here for a little while. And anything I can do to support that, I will. Certainly serving on the board gives me a great opportunity to apply my unique skill set, right? I'm a corporate attorney. I've spent my career 20 plus years advising other directors and officers how to be good stewards, how to be good fiduciaries, how to serve the communities or their organizations well. And I think that has enabled me to be a really successful, effective board member for the last 3 years. I think the biggest testament to that is the fact that my other board members, my fellow board members, selected me to be chair for the last 2 years. After first year of service, they asked me to serve and then serve again for another year. It's quite a compliment and I really appreciate it. And I hope the members give me the chance to serve another 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Scott, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. George, thank you for hosting this forum. I think this is just an excellent vehicle for the membership to learn about the candidates. And I also want to thank the membership for taking the time out and to watch this video and to listen to this conversation. As members read in my first statement, I served on the Sea Ranch board in 2002 to 2005. I understand what's involved and I understand the time commitment. A little over a year ago, a current board member came to me and encouraged me to run for the board again. And I had a little laugh and I said, no, time's not right. I need to finish my Sea Ranch house. And then they tried to assure me, well, there's not really a lot going on in the board right now. And I had to respond, oh, don't ever say that, because there's always something lurking around the corner. And fast forward to a recent conversation with that same board member that replied, oh, you were right. I should have listened to you. So as of February, my wife Linda and I are now living the dream of being at Sea Ranch full time. I now have the time to dedicate to being on the board again. It might be helpful for the members to have a little insight into me. Sure, I love the Sea Ranch and I love the beauty that's around us like everyone else. And I assume that it's true for most of the people at Sea Ranch. However, when I was on the board almost 20 years ago, one of my fellow board members, Ann Harriman, stated, people come here seeking nirvana or an investment. So I'm going to do this really quick. Let's consider this an expedited speed dating session. I'm frugal but not cheap. I'm willing to invest our money in something that's going to save us money later. I'm self-reliant, but I know when to seek out expertise from those who do know. I'm pragmatic. I look for the best solution and execute on it. I'm an engineer, and arguably that might be a bad thing depending upon your point of view of engineers, but I approach problems as a scientist would. I work off of facts, and hyperbole just irritates me. I have a history of service to the Sea Ranch, and even when we didn't have a house here, serving on the board and serving on committees gave me a really good reason to come out to the coast. So back to you, George.
All right, thank you, Scott. The next question, I think everyone can answer briefly, and Manuel will begin the next question with you, and then we'll work around. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the various parts of Sea Ranch, whether those are committees or task forces or neighborhood groups or any of the various components that make up Sea Ranch, be they formal committees or if there's some other form of a working group or contribution to Sea Ranch. Tell us anything about your involvement with Sea Ranch groups. Manuel, would you start, please?
Yes, yeah, thank you. The first thing I did when I got here, and I'm living full time here now, as I said before, is to read everything possible about, how Sea Ranch operates as a nonprofit, association, So I'm fairly familiar with the structure of the governing bodies and the different committees. I'm especially interested in the Commons Landscape Committee. In fact, I was in touch with the committee about issues that are part of my backyard. As I said, living, my house is adjacent to the Commons here. It's one of the corridors, then, down in Area 4, Management Area 4. So I've observed the, different issues that are, part of the management of that. And I just filed a new project for putting together a stewardship group here on this area to address the issues related with the baccaris, the coyote brush, and the other vegetation, the lupines, that because the grazing and all those issues, need management and so forth. So I've been especially interested in that Common Landscape Committee, I think because it offers the greatest opportunities for this group of people to form, fun and go to the land, get your hands dirty, get to know the issues firsthand, and get involved. I think that getting involved, it is the biggest part, of my interest. For the rest, I've been visiting the facilities with experts. I was in Verdant View the other day with a couple of members that explained to me that asset. I've been talking with some of the forest people. I've been making myself familiar with all the issues and committees. And I think I have a fairly good understanding of those. So I think that I'm well prepared to, tackle the issues that each of these committees and departments bring up. I especially appreciate the efforts of the Department of Compliance and Environmental Management. That's such a key aspect of the operations. So I think that it's just admirable the way they have preserved the heritage, the architectural heritage, and the way they are, helping to protect, the environment. I think also, we know that there are some issues about that. Members should not have to wait too long for issues related to construction and renovation. Maybe some modernization of systems and technology there would be advisable. And so, so I think that in general, I think that from the policy making body, which is the board, I've been in several boards, to all the committees and departments, I think that I have a good understanding of the way this place operates.
Thanks. Ray, would you care to respond to the question? I'll repeat it again. What Sea Ranch committees or efforts or contributions have you been a part of, or are you knowledgeable about?
Thank you, George. We've been a member for a little over a year, and in that time, we were trying to get familiar with different committees. And the website, the new website that the association has is amazing, provided us with a lot of information that we needed to find out. And Sea Ranch is so vast. I mean, I work for cities that are about the size of Sea Ranch. Currently, I'm helping out with City of Half Moon Bay, and they have the same trails like we have along the coast, and their city structure is the same as association structure here, except obviously it's an incorporated city in California as opposed to the Sea Ranch. But I've been working with the design committee for the past year in order to get our house approved, and Lisa Dundee and her staff are amazing. I don't know how they do that with that limited amount of staff. I hope they get the additional staff that probably Chris Jack has approved already, and that they could be up to date, because they do an amazing job. I mean, we started out, the current house that my wife Evelina and I and my father and my brother have in San Mateo, I designed and built that house, and I've designed a few buildings, structures, community centers, etc. in my time, but we never really have talked with multiple architects as to getting their input into your design. And even though I've read all the books about Sea Ranch, however, it's something else to actually live in Sea Ranch and experience it firsthand and work with the design committee. So they're amazing. It's number one. Landscape committee, we have the Heritage Grove on our property, and obviously up the hill, we have a lot of landscape areas as well as beautiful redwood trees. And I like to work with them more, even though my background is not landscape architecture, but in my work, I work with landscape architects a lot. And I feel like the trees and the natural environment that we have, it's very important to the future of Sea Ranch. So I would like to work with them more. Of course, the infrastructure committee, I like to make sure that our water system, our sewer collection system, our roads, our trails, and for either bicyclists or pedestrians, the one on the ocean, that's kept well, as well as the fiber optics. So I'm very interested in the future. The infrastructure is what builds a community. Back after World War II, the U.S. was ahead of all the other countries in terms of infrastructure. That's why we became what we are today. And since then, our infrastructure has kind of diminished. And hopefully, the new push, we're going to get our infrastructure up. What makes Sea Ranch what we are now is not only the stewardess of the land and living lightly on the land, but also the infrastructure. And most of it we don't see because it's underground. The underground structure, the problem is that most people don't understand the underground structure and don't invest time and money in it. But we have in Sea Ranch. And I'm hoping that we could plan for the next 50 years. So that's one of the committees that I think my background and in city engineering would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Chris, would you respond?
Sure. Succinctly, I think, as I said earlier, I've been a board member for 3 years. I've been sort of on the front line, seeing how things operate, working very closely, almost daily with staff, with my fellow board members, with the chairs of different committees, with members of different committees, with volunteers in the community, with community members who have concerns, from litter on the trails to, noise at the airport to everything in between. I'm actively involved and have been. It's a labor of love. I really, really enjoy it. I spend probably about 30 to 50 hours a month and have for the past 3 years as a board member. There's opportunity to do more. I wish I had even more capacity to give and spend time doing it. Outside of board activities, things that people may not know. I'm really excited. My partner and I finished our 50-mile hike here at Sea Ranch. We finished hiking all of the trails. I'm really excited. That was a big project several years ago during the 50th anniversary. A Visions Committee rolled out with the Trails Committee. And I now have a pin commemorating completion of hiking all the trails. I'm excited about that. I served on the Finance Committee for a while, learned a lot about the organization and the importance of our volunteers and the contributions they make. Before that, I was probably a rabble rouser in some folks' mind. When we first bought our home here at Sea Ranch, my partner and I specifically picked out a home in a quiet little neighborhood, not unlike many others, but uniquely away from all the trails. We are at the far south end of Sea Ranch, and we love it. It's great. It's quiet. We have all the wonderful benefits of this great community, but we also have the solitude, the quietness, and a little bit larger lots that make us feel we're really getting away from our day-to-day, or what had been our day-to-day. Now it's the full-time, which I love. And within that first year we moved here, we received notice that the Trails Committee was proposing a trail in our backyard, literally going along our property line. And so quickly reaching out to my neighbors, we engaged, we talked about it. We wrote letters to the Trails Committee, the Planning Committee, the board, talked to them, went to meetings, even went on a hike with the Trails Committee and some of the board members at the time. They probably thought I was a thorn in the side, and who knows, maybe that's where I first got interested in really getting out there and participating in the process more. But it was a good experience, and I'm happy to say our concerns were heard and the plans were adjusted. There is still a trail, but it's in a location a little bit further away from where we live today. And I really do appreciate the process that we went through, the opportunity to get to know our neighbors, that the board at that time heard our concerns. And it's certainly a lesson, for me now as a board member, and the importance of listening to our neighbors. We've got projects in front of us. First coming to mind, of course, is a solar array. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I think there's still an opportunity for the board to hear more from our neighbors about that project and others. And I am keenly aware of how important that input is. So love the community, been really involved in, even if I'm not on the board in the next 3 years, you can count on me still being out there, still being active, still being the best steward I can for this community.
Thanks, Chris. Scott, would you respond? Tell us about your committee involvement, efforts, contributions, specifically at the Sea Ranch.
Absolutely, George. So I jumped into the deep end of the pool in 2002 by running for the board. We obviously did not have a house back then. We lived in Santa Rosa. It was an eye-opening experience. I learned so much about the operations of the Sea Ranch and the governance of Sea Ranch. I really valued the 3 years that I had in board service. And, you know, I'll echo what Chris said, and I kind of said it in my opening statement. I know what the time commitment is now, and I know what's involved in it. You can end up sinking a lot of hours into issues as they come up. And it's why I never ran for the board again until, well, I did run for the board again, but now after coming to the realization that we really needed to be here full time to me to be able to dedicate the time to it. When I came off of the board, one of the big issues that we had at the time, and I served on a task force of the board, was dealing with the reservoir repair. And that was a big issue. When we bought the water company, it was pretty creaky. There was some issues with the dam, and the board had to make some expensive decisions at the time in working on those repairs. And I served with one other board member and the chair of the utilities committee and the community manager, and we figured out a set of solutions to bring to the board to get that moving forward. After I came off the board, I was the liaison to the utilities committee at that when I came off the board, and I ended up joining the utilities committee because I had such a vested interest in the operations of our water company that I continued in that service. And at that time, we were moving through some. We had to really come up with a comprehensive plan, what we call the master plan, of how we were going to modernize the water company. At the time, a couple of people on the committee and myself worked on a hydraulic model to help figure out what we were going to do with supplying enough water for California regulations for firefighting. We didn't have enough water in storage, and we didn't have enough water pressure up on the ridge. So I was intimately involved in that and moving that forward, which ended up turning into the Tank 8 project. And then also during that time, I was very, very interested in helping the water company come up with a vision to move them forward on how to monitor the operations of the water company. At the time, it was a very manual process. They had to sit and monitor the water treatment plant. As a science project, I built a monitoring system for the water company so that they could really see what was going on, and they could go to a web page off of a smartphone, off a computer at home, and they could actually see what was going on in the water company. And then I won a community service award for those efforts. I served on the first solar array task force. So as we were, we came up with the ideas like, hey, we should really start to, become more reliant on generating our own electricity. And the efforts of that first solar array task force ended up with building out the solar array that's up at the water treatment plant and what's now at the barns, the car barns, I guess it is, or the maintenance building in back of the association. So those are really the first two big solar arrays that we did. I took a brief hiatus to finish raising my son, and I jumped back in about 2 years ago. I guess it's actually 3 years ago now, because my term's up. We knew that we were going to be building. We already had our plans in motion. I decided to get involved back into governance of the Sea Ranch and the obvious spot was to rejoin the Utilities Committee. I was made chair the first year that I was on the Utilities Committee, and right now I kind of view the Utilities Committee as in I would think kind of a reformation. The water company, I wouldn't say is totally in hand, but the Utilities Committee doesn't have to spend a lot of time on the water company anymore. I mean, we do. That's not to say that we don't have projects in front of us. But what I tried to do with the board's support was we now have two separate subcommittees underneath the Utilities Committee, and I help kind of guide creating those subcommittees. And that is the Sea Ranch Connect subcommittee, which I'm the chair of. And so we have kind of the oversight responsibility that we took from the board to watch over our fiber optic infrastructure. And then we've created the energy subcommittee. And I think you're going to see some very exciting things coming out of the energy subcommittee in the next year. Now that we're, I think we understand photovoltaics. This is, to me, is kind of an operational issue. Yes, we've got land issues to talk about, and we've got neighborhood issues to talk about. But by and large, we know that we should be doing these projects, right? I mean, it just gets us to our point of being self-reliant and generating our own electricity and getting us to the point of being carbon neutral. But what we're going to start seeing out of the energy subcommittee and where they're starting to go now is looking at different ways for us to become more self-reliant. If people have read about microgrids, right? The city of Healdsburg is their own microgrid. They are basically an island from PG&E. They run their own electricity infrastructure. They've had some really big projects with photovoltaics recently, and they don't have to have their power shut off when PG&E wants to shut power off. And I kind of have the vision that Sea Ranch going forward into the future, we could become that. We could literally disconnect ourselves from the Gualala substation, and with enough electricity generation and storage and some creative ways to manage our electricity, I think we could get there.
Thanks, Scott. Gina, would you care to respond?
Sure. Well, I haven't had the formal experience and participation with the Sea Ranch to date. The board is sort of a leaping off point for me. But I have, for sort of all the time I've owned a place here, followed, all of the actions of the board, read all of the, publications that came out, both on the website as well as, in the publications that have come out over time. So I think I understand the Sea Ranch and how it operates well. I've kind of walked every trail and every mile of the Sea Ranch over time. So I guess I'm familiar with both the landscape as well. But I'm very interested in participating on the board for the reasons I articulated. I think I could add value on, hopefully, for example, the Finance Committee. I think the Planning Committee would be very interesting. So as I say, this again would be my first real formal participation.
Thank you, Gina. Let's move on, and Ray, I'm going to ask you to begin with this question, but this is I'm going to combine a couple of questions. The commitment to the board, it is a 3-year term on the board, and the question is kind of twofold. Can you commit, barring some medical reason or a family emergency, can you commit to fulfilling the full term? And the second part of the question is that the board commitment is a significant amount of time. I spoke to a past board member who indicated to me that when things are at low tide, so to speak, when things aren't too busy or too crazy, you still need 2 to 5 hours a week as a board member. When things ramp up and the board is facing complex issues or a difficult situation, that might amount to 20 hours a week or more. are those two commitments, fulfilling the term and then the time commitment on a weekly or monthly basis. Let's begin, Ray, let's begin with you, please.
That's a good question, George. I talked to Chris Japp, and he was kind enough to have a long conversation with me because I just wanted to make sure that if I'm committing to 3 years and going through the board of directors meeting minutes for the past year to understand exactly what kind of issues you have and how much commitment do we need in terms of weekly and hourly basis. So I'm 62 years old, and I retired as a city engineer a few years ago. Now I have my own one-man consulting firm, and I try to keep it as around 75%, 70 to 75% capacity. I think the other 25% I like to dedicate to a good cause like this. When Chris and I talked, there was about 30 to 50 hours a week that he said that he uses for the board. And that's, I think I can commit to that. 3 years, I think I have another 3 years in me. So at least I hope. And it's a good thing. It's a good cause. I mean, if I wanted to dedicate some part of my future into helping community, I would say yes. I'm prepared for it.
Great. Thanks. Chris, do you want to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I hope I didn't misspeak and say 30 to 50 hours per week. I don't want to see any of our candidates drop out of the Zoom meeting before it's over. It's a monthly number that I look at. We joke about attorneys tracking time and the 0.1 increment hours. I actually do track my non-billable time, including Sea Ranch and other community activities. It's an important part of what I do. For me, I started my own private practice through over 4 years ago now. And I did that specifically so that I could be more available and do more in the community. And part of that was joining the finance committee, joining the board. Certainly I've done that, and I'll continue doing that if I'm reelected. I look forward to it. Much like Ray with his own practice, I specifically manage my schedule so that I can be an active and engaged member of the community. And I look forward to it.
Thanks, Chris. Scott, would you respond to that?
Sure.
Completing the
I think I kind of said it in my opening statement, right? I waited until we were here full time because I just know the time commitment involved. And being here gives you a different perspective, right? I can be to anywhere in the Sea Ranch in less than 15 minutes and go look at something. And I'm not committing to 3 years, I'm committing to 6 years. If elected now, I will run again. I mean it seriously. I mean, there's something about institutional knowledge, right? I mean, and Chris can appreciate that as you gain knowledge into the Sea Ranch. I mean, that's invaluable. There's a lot of really complicated issues that come up, whether it's the water company or it's land use or God knows it, all of the possible things that have happened over the history of the Sea Ranch. Being able to recall that and bring it to whatever the current situation is extremely valuable.
Thanks, Scott. Gina, how about you? Can you make the full 3-year term? Would you fulfill the 3-year term? And more, as importantly, can you put in the time on the weekly or monthly basis that the board takes?
Sure. Again, barring unforeseen circumstances, I expect to do the 3 years at least. And yeah, I wouldn't have run for the board or put my name in if I didn't think I couldn't give it adequate time going forward. I mean, I have a lot of flexibility in my work and where I am at any point in time. I go out to the Sea Ranch a lot. I'm not obviously there every day, and I would expect to be doing that more. I can do anything that I do here, there. So I think I can commit to that amount of time that people are talking about that they know it entails.
Thanks, Gina. Manuel, would you comment on the question?
Yeah, sure. You should ask my wife, Martha, about that. I think that when I first entertained the idea, she and I discussed it because she knows how I am and how seriously I take everything that I do. And I've been in boards before, so I am aware of the time that it takes if you want to do things well. You know, I mean, there's two ways to do it. I've spoken also with ex-board members and current board members, so I am pretty aware of the commitment. But also I have to say that, I mean, one of my consulting jobs is as a senior business analyst, and I have helped so many organizations with what is called process improvement. And I think, you know, things can be always improved and make more agile and implement better systems and try to, for all of us to have, you know, a balanced life between work and fun and all those things. So I think that there is a way to do that. And just just a little comment to Scott's, I think cultural and institutional knowledge is very important, but I also believe in fresh perspectives. I think that sometimes institutions get what is called cultural lock-in, and the institutional knowledge becomes more of a load rather than an advantage. So I think that refreshing the board and getting new people, new ideas, new perspectives, there's tons of expertise around. This place is amazing with the level of talent that you have. You go around the block here and you find people in all areas so I think that, and external people too. So for example, I have worked with Joe McBride, the forester that has been advising the Sea Ranch forever. He was sitting on one of the boards that I was sitting. And I think that in that sense, fresh perspectives coupled with the right expertise, external or internal, can be also a really good idea for the Sea Ranch as it moves forward. But yeah, I can make the commitment. I'm healthy, and I can definitely make 3 years and put what, Chris, 50 hours a week. That's what you said.
Thanks, Manuel. Next question, and this can be generally answered by a yes or no, if you would, and I'll give the question and you'll see why. Question is how conversant or familiar are you with the governing documents of the Sea Ranch and California law concerning homeowners associations? That's a yes or no question, or give us an approximate idea. The second question is, if you're not real familiar with the governing documents of the Sea Ranch and California law around HOAs, because these are the things that these are the constraints a board has to live with. How will you bring yourself up to speed with those things? So a yes or a no, and then how you would proceed if you need to build on your knowledge. Let's begin. I think Chris, it's your turn.
Okay. Yes, I'm familiar with them. I'm happy to say as a board member, I am familiar. Nobody needs to worry that I'm unfamiliar and yet still serving on the board. You know, all joking aside, for the past 3 years, I've chaired our governance committee as well as the board for the last 2. The governance committee, you know, I instigated because I thought it was really important, not only for board members to understand, you know, our governing documents, but to have a robust governance process in place, to understand and ensure what those documents are, to review them periodically, to improve them, to work with council to make sure they stay current with relevant laws. You know, this year, again, we're working with new council, focusing on Davis-Sterling requirements to bring our governing documents, our rules, our policies, our procedures up to snuff, really. So yeah, that's near and dear to my heart, you know, of course, not least of which because I am a corporate attorney, I do like to comply with those requirements. You know, and what I would say to the other board members who are not yet familiar with it, Davis-Sterling, among all of its requirements, makes our jobs difficult in one particularly unique way, and that is the requirement that meetings be held publicly, you know, with advance notice, or in the limited few exceptions where we can meet privately in executive session, for example, to discuss personnel matters, we still have to provide notice. And that notice requirement and that publicity is wonderful in the sense of being accessible and providing information to all the community members. But I can assure you that almost every director I know, current and past, has felt somewhat constrained by that requirement because it does limit how the directors do interact, how they engage, when they can meet and discuss projects, you know, sort of move the proverbial ball down the field. And that's something that, you know, every board, every HOA board in California has to grapple with. Of course, it's not unique to us, but it is an eye opener, and you know, something we all have to understand as board members. And that in particular, I would encourage folks who aren't familiar with it to brush up on it. And the governance committee, whether I'm on it or not, will I'm sure be overseeing some training for new board members, focusing on that issue in particular.
Great. Scott?
Yes.
How are you with the governing documents? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I had to be, being on the board previously, but as Chris pointed out, Davis Sterling is, you know, it's constantly changing, and so it's a moving target. So am I familiar with, you know, what the recent changes are with Davis Sterling? No. But that's a reason why we have legal counsel in the board meetings, is to provide that guidance to make sure that the board doesn't go off the tracks.
Thanks. For our viewers, you've heard the Davis Sterling Act mentioned a couple of times, and that is the name of the, I'm not really sure why it acquired the name Davis and Sterling. Probably they formulated the law, but that's the law that governs homeowners associations in the state of California. And so every homeowner association within the state has to abide by that law. And there are a number of restrictions and requirements that provide. So just wanted some explanation. Gina, would you?
Oh, I have an interesting fact about Davis Sterling. The Davis part was Gray Davis, who was the governor at one before that. But the woman who actually wrote Davis Sterling never got credit for it.
Okay. Thanks. We'll remember that at the next Sea Ranch trivia meetup, Sea Ranch Jeopardy. Gina, would you comment on your familiarity with Sea Ranch governing documents and California homeowner association requirements, and how you're going to become more familiar and gain a better amount of knowledge if you need to do so?
Well, I think I always need to do so. I made a commitment when I thought about running to read everything, to read all the governing documents and make sure I understood them. It made it a little easier with my legal background, but you know, it was certainly wading through them. I think they're actually very clear, and you really can work with them. And as I'm sure Chris and everyone knows that. So I think I can say yes on the familiarity without having, I guess, worked with them per se. On the association level, actually, it's been more on sort of the developer side, where we have developed projects that have had homeowner associations in the structure and developing those for that particular project. In New York, obviously it's not California law, but I have been on the board of the condominium association forever where I live. And I think that also gives me the underlying principles of an association and the rules that tend to be somewhat general, you know, across states, although obviously very specific ones would apply in a particular state.
Great. Manuel, would you comment?
Yeah. I think I mentioned in my first statement that, I mean, I actually read when I bought the house, me and Martha, when we bought the house, I actually read the Sea Ranch rules and the Declaration of Restrictions, Covenants, and Conditions, because I was fascinated by, you know, that voluntarily expressed commitment, you know, to follow certain limitations that put the community over the individual. And that's actually one of the things that was more attractive to me, that spirit of, we will make decisions that when we can, we'll put the community over the individual. And by signing this document, like this is the constitution of our commitment, I think that, so yeah. The second thing I did is I downloaded every single board agenda from available in the Sea Ranch and every single document and put it on a database that is searchable, because I got interested, for example, in the short-term rental, like many of you. So now I have a database where I can type any term I have every reference made in every meeting of the association, referring to every opinion, every expert. I think that science-driven and expertise-driven decisions are crucial. So I think that, yeah, I'm very familiar, and I actually feel very comfortable with the procedural aspects of those documents, including garage sales and how they should be conducted, you know, which is kind of funny now how that, you know, gets put into place.
Thanks, Manuel. Ray, would you comment or answer the question?
Sure. I've dealt with a few homeowner associations, served in one, but not as familiar with the David Sterling Act as I would like to be. So I'm going to look up to Chris and other members to educate me a little bit more. I have been working with the Brown Act, which is very similar, and that's for the city councils and all the procedures, all the notification, etc. I've been working with that for the past 30 years. So I hope to kind of be brought up to speed as necessary very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to continue on now with a series of questions related to specific issues at Sea Ranch and current topics that will face the new board. And these are issues that have been coming up and being looked at by the current board and previous boards, but certainly the next board will be facing these things. So let's take a look here. The management of our forests has been a topic at Sea Ranch for a number of years. We have looked at ways to manage the forest, how intensively to manage it, how hands-off to manage it. Ultimately, the forest task force was formed a few years ago, which completed a series of recommendations, a very lengthy set of recommendations, which was eventually adopted by a board. I think the board 2 years ago, if memory serves me correctly. One thing that came up in that set of recommendations was examining the concept of carbon sequestration. Viewers who may not be familiar with that, carbon sequestration refers to maintaining forests, and in our case, particularly redwoods, but all trees to some degree, because trees become a storage facility for carbon. In other words, carbon is not released into the atmosphere, doesn't contribute to climate change or those things. Carbon sequestration means using your trees to hold carbon for the long term. We have received information about a carbon sequestration project from an organization called the Carbon Forest Project. I think that's the correct term. I'm sorry?
Carbon Forest Works.
Thank you. That's correct. Carbon Forest Works. Thank you. Thanks, Manuel. Yeah. About an approach to carbon sequestration. So I'd like to hear from each candidate your thoughts on the idea of carbon sequestration and its applicability to the Sea Ranch, and then specifically any comments that you have about the Carbon Forest Works organization and what they're proposing. Or if you have other ideas about the use of the forest, and particularly as it relates to carbon sequestration, we'd love to hear those too. Why don't we, I don't know where we were at. I think, Scott, I think it's your turn to start, Scott. Why don't you kick off?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
So, you know, the problem is right now is that the membership really hasn't seen the details behind this. We've gotten some information from the spouse of one of the board members on the listserv, and that's about as much as we know about it. I think conceptually, you know, the idea is a good one in terms of what we're facing with climate change. However, the scant details that I've seen, I have significant concerns with, especially with tying up our forested commons for 125 years. I I'm fearful that that ties the hands of future boards who may decide to do something in managing the forests in a different way that we've done so far. You know, if you look at our central timber production zone, the CPTZ, that forest we bought after it had been logged, and it was an old growth redwood forest. And when we bought it, we didn't go back in and replant it with redwood trees. We left it, and it is now it's now overgrown, and it's not overgrown with redwood trees. It's overgrown with other species. And, you know, I've talked to officials that have looked at it and people that have studied it. And we might have, you know, on the order of 4 to 8 times the number of stalks, trees growing in there that would be considered healthy. And the problem is that what's growing in there ends up being it ends up crowding out the redwood trees, right? I mean, the percentage of old growth redwood left on the West Coast is about somewhere between 5 and 7% of what it used to be. You know, we now own that. That used to be an old growth redwood. And, you know, I would love to allow future boards, if they decide that, you know, we really want to turn that back into a second growth redwood forest, that we haven't tied the hands of future boards to be able to do that. So I'm hoping that we get to see more about this proposal, and so we can, the membership can understand and weigh in on it. And then I think we can make a more informed decision.
Manuel, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is one of the areas that I paid most attention because I have had experience with forest management. The tropical rainforests, and also with, you know, Pacific Northwest. I think California, it just leads the cap and trade program, a carbon sequestration program that is an example for the world of how to offset climate change emissions. I think that for me, just to know that first, this issue doesn't affect the entire forest of the Sea Ranch. We have 1,500 acres of forest. We're talking about, what Scott said, is 500, okay? And it's not 125 years, it's 100 years, you know, that. But when I read that, Joe McBride calculated in the report in 2003 that logging the central production zone by 50%, which it would be unthinkable, would produce how much money you think? About $500,000. Well, you guess what? This contract proposes to give us more money, like near $700,000, just for letting the forest sit there. And redwoods are capturing 3 times more carbon than any other terrestrial ecosystem. So this, having redwoods here in the Sea Ranch, it's an amazing gift. Now, depending on the stages of regeneration, you'll see different densities in the redwood forest. We have something now called a zero redwood forest. Redwood forests are self-thinning. The process eventually leads itself to a balanced mature forest. So these issues of abundance of other species are not, it's just a time scale. I think it is not a static situation. So I think that we are lucky that a company like Carbon Forest Networks, that was vetted by Joe McBride, that it's actually a leading company. We're lucky that they have invested so much money into assessing our forests, calculating the value of this contract. And I think that it's just, to me, it's just a fantastic opportunity to know that by putting 500 acres of redwoods into contract, we can say that all the residents of the Sea Ranch at any time would have offset their carbon emissions for a lifetime. It's calculated that 2 trees, 2 mature redwoods, will offset your emissions, George, for your lifetime, or for the lifetime of a person. So the amount of trees in those 500 acres are sufficient for us to proudly say that the Sea Ranch has already offset the emissions of all its residents. And that will be an example to the whole world. I don't think that in any community that I know this is happening. And then they're gonna give us $750,000, $800,000, I don't know what the value is, that can be reinvested into long-term management for the vegetation costs. So the forest is by the forest and for the forest. It will be a self-virtuous circle where we capture such an asset in the most intelligent way. I read the Forest Task Force report. I was so glad to see finally 21st century concept of forest management, of fire science. I think that the Forest Task Force has done an amazing job. And again, I'm very familiar with forest projects. And I think that definitely as a board member, I would support managing our forests for hazards in the developed areas and managing for natural processes in the undeveloped areas, because that not only preserve this for future generations, but also is the most intelligent way of capturing value of these forests. So yeah, totally for it.
Okay, Ray?
Based on my what I read and kind of researched about the Carbon Forest Works and the sequestration that that we have in the board report, I fully support this project, but that's based on preliminary information. It's a good project. It's what we can leave for the future generations. Over 100 years of a program to keep our forest and report and actually use it as a future study for other forests. That's immense. I mean, we as a pioneering association that we are stewards of the land, we should set an example of how to manage these forests. Right. Again, putting my hat on as a kind of technical guy and looking at the details, I would like to see the final agreement and see what the details are in the agreement. And I'm sure that our legal attorneys would also like to take a look at that. But what the information that we provided to us, it sounds great to me, and I'm fully supported. But I like to look at the details of the agreement also and make sure that whatever resources we have to commit in managing this in order to obtain the $600,000 to $700,000, that we are able to do that. If we're committing to it, just like committing to the board of directors at 3 years, and like Chris says, 30 to 50 hours a month, not a week, we need to make sure that we can afford to provide the resources to make sure the agreement is satisfied. But I fully support it.
Thanks.
At this
Gina,
point.
would you like?
I forgot to mention something.
Thank you, Ray.
I forgot to mention 30 seconds, something important. I think there was a carbon workshop scheduled to be presented to the membership, and it was rescheduled, but I think that there is going to be such an opportunity for all the members to examine all the details.
Yeah, that's correct. And for viewers, that carbon sequestration workshop is going to be held a week from today, so that would be April 10th for those of you that are watching this video prior to April 10th. Otherwise, you'll need to watch it some other way. Gina, would you care to weigh in on the carbon sequestration and the Carbon Forest Works proposal?
Sure. From what I've seen today, which is certainly not everything, and as a couple of people said, I'd like to see more in order to really come up with more of a definitive point of view. I mean, I was very excited when the board a few years ago decided that the forest needed to be preserved for habitat and recreation. So as a starting point, I think preserving the forests was a very important step for the association. I think again, it's weighing the factors, and so, for example, I don't believe, as people have said, that it takes all of the area and puts it under the cap and trade program. It only takes a portion of that. So that land that would be subsumed within that versus the land that wouldn't be, as to giving options to the Sea Ranch Association of what they might want to do differently than that is being done now, I think is an important consideration. And how the value was determined to come up with the amount of money that the Sea Ranch would be given. I haven't seen sort of the analysis that says 750,000 was a good price, if you will. I do think the California Cap and Trade program is one of the best. It's certainly better than a tax credit program in terms of worrying as much about government control and the government and coming in and, you know, making us do things we don't want to. The tax credit programs, I think, are worse in that respect. So I have a little less hesitancy about entering the, you know, the California Cap and Trade program versus another one. But I think, you know, if we can create value out of something that is actually beautiful and valuable in itself, and there are so many uses for that money, whether it's fuels management, land management, whatever kinds of costs that are in front of us, which are significant and substantial, I think that is certainly worth pursuing. And I think the task force, the Forest Task Force, has done a tremendous amount of research and put effort into this. So I think when we do have all the information, I think it will be all the information we need to understand it fully.
Chris, would you go ahead and comment and maybe take into account some of the points some of the other candidates have spoken about, is that members generally don't have much detailed information about the Carbon Forest Works project. The questions that Gina just raised is the $700,000 number, is that represent the best and highest that we can get, or do we have other options? How do we learn? Maybe wrap some of those thoughts in there too. But first, your thoughts on the project itself as it stands right now.
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying, there are going to be people who are in favor of this simply because it would prevent any logging in the forest, right? And there are going to be other people who are abjectly opposed to this because it's a 125-year commitment, or or it's enabling pollution, additional pollution under the cap and trade program, incremental, right? Every credit we sell allows some industry to pollute a little bit more above some standard, right? And so just as a matter of principle, they're going to be opposed to it. As a board member, I believe I don't have that luxury of absolutes. I really need to think about this holistically. And I do. I don't have a firm opinion. I will say, I think this could be an opportunity for us as a community, a sea ranch, known for living lightly on the land, to model our principles, right? To actually live our values, to demonstrate them, to promote them in the community by saying, we're going to protect this forest indefinitely, right? And I think that's really powerful, right? 5 years ago, when we celebrated our 50th anniversary, we worked with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art to put on a big production and to really recognize what this community has created and what it stands for. This could be a similarly large, momentous opportunity to really speak our values loudly. But it doesn't, it's not a given for sure. There are lots of good questions we've heard here. I want to pause and say thank you to the Forest Task Force and all the volunteers that worked and spent countless hours getting to this point. As we've heard, yes, the Forest Task Force developed some guidelines that were unanimously adopted by the board in February 2020, I believe, so just a year ago. Yes. And that included specifically a recommendation that the board consider entering into a partnership with Forest Carbon Works, specifically, they were identified in the guidelines, for carbon sequestration. So this truly isn't coming out of nowhere. But in all fairness, frankly, to current board members and community members, we as a group haven't heard a lot about it since that board meeting in February, right? And I want to give a shout out to my colleagues on the board and the Vegetation Management Committee in particular. They've really heard some of that feedback and concern about member engagement and building a common sense of purpose within the community, changing hearts and minds, right? This is a real leadership opportunity for the community if we go down this path. This is not simply a financial transaction. Nor is this simply a forest preservation opportunity. It's bigger than that. And while the board could merely approve a contract in executive session, for those of you who don't know, under Davis-Sterling, boards are allowed to consider certain matters without a public hearing, without a public meeting. Contracts and negotiations are one of those elements. But that will not happen for this, at least not as long as I can have a say in it. And again, to the credit of my colleagues on the Vegetation Management Committee, and to be clear to anybody who's watching this contract has not been proposed for board approval yet. There's not been a board vote on it. To the contrary, the board just received the contract and information about this at its last meeting now a month ago, and provided feedback that we really need to engage in a conversation with the community before rushing too quickly on this. I mean, we are spending a lot more time as a community engaging in workshops and seminars and surveys on things like the verdant view development, right? Short-term rental task force. We've had that task force up and running for 2 years. I would say this is in the order of magnitude of importance for our community as any of those two initiatives or others. And I'm really proud that they've sort of tapped the brake, paused, and are suggesting that the board really figure out how to engage with the community, have this discussion, and figure out really what does the community want to do? Is this consistent with our values? Is it in our best interest? And there are a lot of questions that the board still doesn't have, and that the Vegetation Management Committee has been working to pull together so we can share those with members. It's been suggested, I don't know if it's there yet, but it's been suggested the contract itself be posted on the association website for anybody who wants to look at it. I mean, the effort of transparency has been clear, and I expect that will continue over the next, weeks, months, as this is pursued or considered. But I want to share a couple of facts because not everybody has the same information. I've had the luxury of getting a debrief from the Vegetation Management Committee, and I've heard a couple of things on here. So I just want to share a couple of facts. So the forested area we're talking about, as I understand it, and I've seen a map from FCW that shows about 550 plus acres that would be part of this project. That's more than twice the size of the CTPZ, which is about 280, right? So it's a little bit, it is bigger than just the central timber production zone and that central forest area of redwoods. It would include more of the forested lands, not all. It's only about a third total. I understand it would not include our hedgerows. It would certainly permit us to do some forest maintenance, fire mitigation as we have. Yes, there are constraints. We couldn't remove trees. No, we couldn't do a timber harvest plan that would be meaningful because we have to maintain the same carbon sequestration efficacy that we have today, right? So, if the forest grows 5% a year, we could perhaps remove 5% of the trees. Nobody's suggesting that, by the way, just to be clear. Second thing I heard is, I want to be clear, the central timber production zone in particular is not now, or not recently, hasn't become recently a second growth redwood forest. It's been harvested, it's been cut for generations, frankly. We had the opportunity to buy it back in the 90s or 80s. We passed as a community long before I was here, but we passed on that opportunity. However, when it came up after the lumber company went through there before, we did buy it in the 90s. I think we spent about $500,000 on it. And it was identified and procured for habitat and recreation trails for really a gem in our community. I mean, we should be immensely proud that we have this in our backyard and that we essentially are entrusted to manage this redwood forest and other forests. Second thing, just to clarify, I've heard it's 100 years, 125 years, and I'd ask everybody to think about it in 25-year increments. It's a 25-year commitment to the state, where we have the reporting and conservation efforts. And when we stop at the end of that 25 years, we can up for another 25, or we can start what is, as I understand it, a 100-year clock, right? And so for 100 years, then we have to maintain it after that, but we're no longer part of the program per se. We're not necessarily collecting revenue. If we go for another 25 years for a total of 50, at the end of that, after the revenue for 50 years, then yes, it would be another 100 years after that 50 years. So it's sort of a rolling process, as I understand it. The price, about $800,000 that they pay us over a period of time, lump sum up front, significant, just a little under $600,000. What does that represent? If you're really focused on the finances, I do this sort of back of the envelope approach, right? What is it worth? I don't know. I haven't valued. We don't have a value for our forest, but I know the Southern Timber Production Zone just south of us here at Sea Ranch was on the market for about $4 or $5 million a few years ago. And if you assume that's 5 million-ish and our forests are worth about the same, 800,000, annualized represents about a 2.5% return. So even if we sold our forest for $5 million, stuck the cash in the bank, the proceeds in a money market, we would never get 2.5%. Right now, the markets are paying, I don't know, many folks probably know better than I do, 0.25%, 0.4%, 0.5% today. I mean, interest rates are at a historic low. So if we wanted to make money, selling the forest and investing that wouldn't be the way to do it. I kind of look at this as an opportunity twofold. One, to really live our values, as I said, that's a really exciting opportunity, I look forward to engaging in a conversation about that. As I said, I know some people are going to be adamantly opposed to it because it's a long-term commitment, or maybe because it is enabling pollution. We'll have that discussion. There are also issues. Scott said he's got questions about it. I do too, right? The business partner we're working with we're told is the only one available to us who would be interested in participating in this small of a market opportunity. I've chatted with colleagues in the energy industry, and I'm starting to reach the same conclusion. They have a good reputation. They have a history. They're a for-profit benefit corporation with strong backers looking to do this. Great. But if they breach the contract, if they're not there for us, after 6 years or beyond, then what? Who do we go to? Who's going to pay us this revenue that we're expecting? Are they really going to be there? What's the financial wherewithal? Is this price the right one? Gina's absolutely asking the right question. If they're great that they're paying us, but is that market? I don't know. It feels like we should get an expert in the industry to give us some advice on this. There are a lot of questions, through this process. We need to figure out, what does the community really want? Is this the right thing? Are we prepared to live our values by doing this, to really protect and preserve this forest for future generations? I'm sensitive to the concern about that long-term commitment and the underlying suggestion that we don't trust future boards to make this decision. I'm not that skeptical of future boards. Frankly, as a community, we have insurance, right? I mean, we have earthquake insurance, we have fire insurance. I can't think of a scenario where we would need so much capital that we would sell our forest or engage in a logging project. I can't see it happening. I think having that forest here and allowing it to grow and to enjoy those trails for generations is really powerful. So I'm glad our Vegetation Management Committee hit the pause button. I want to talk with folks in the community about this. To be clear, I haven't made a decision personally. I still have questions. Some I've listed, more to be discussed, I'm sure, and others smarter than me will ask even tougher questions. But this is a really exciting opportunity and something I'm very curious about.
Well, thank you, Chris. I think we've heard a range of ideas there, which are great in a very important issue that we will face in one form or another here at Sea Ranch. Let's move on to an equally important topic, and that's about the proposed solar arrays. The Solar Array Task Force was formed several years ago, and it's been through various committees. Somebody may be able to correct me. I don't know its entire history. Suffice it to say, the use of solar arrays has been studied for quite a while within the Sea Ranch committee structure. A solar array has been proposed adjacent to the airport. There's been quite a bit of debate across social media channels and neighbor to neighbor, I'm sure. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on the solar array as it's proposed, and any comments on the process that the solar array has been studied at, how we got to the point we're at. Boy, who did we start with? Let's Manuel, I think it's your turn if you'd like to kick this off.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I'll start by saying that any form of energy production isn't perfect. And I think that solar is not perfect. Solar has issues as well as any other form. I think that I have heard in this issue the same type of opinions that Chris is mentioning about the forest issue. I think that there are concerned members in terms of, you know, the cost and the lack of a thorough study. We have approximate numbers in terms of how that is going to look like. There are issues about alternative locations. That is not the airport. I visited the site, I walked it, I read the task force report for the solar. So I think that in this one, I have to say that I understand the concerns that people have, not wanting to have that facility next to them, if especially there are other sites that could be revisited. I think everybody is understanding that we operate under what is called net metering NMET2, which is the possibility of aggregating contiguous land into a single meter. And I think that Verdant View, for example, is an area that could be re-examined in terms of if it offers not that connectivity, because it is preferable, in my opinion, to use existing buildings and in areas that are more, you know, not adjacent to properties and to neighbors to place such facility. Also, I have to say that, I mean, of course, as an environmentalist, I think definitely solar, it's the best option we have again, but I think that at the same time, it's not the only option. There are power purchase agreements that I have seen in the past that I participated in Central America and in Europe, where, you know, there are advantages in many ways to also have the same effect of getting to a zero carbon neutral footprint for the association. So I think that what I would like to see for the solar, it's a deeper conversation about the finances, the environmental impacts, and I think that it's going to be a difficult issue. I think same as Chris mentioned for the forest, because, you know, there is this polarization, but I think that definitely there is the need to act on the energy front here and to examine, this is not the kind of thing you want to do and then change your mind in 20 years, like, oh, we made a mistake. Because to take apart a solar array with 600 panels, it actually implies toxicity. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not like, oops, and probably other members that are more in the engineering front can testify to that. So yeah, it's an open question for me, and I think I would like to learn more about it, especially financials. I haven't seen that. And also locations and the costs of landscaping that have been mentioned to block it from the view, and other impacts on wildlife and birds and things like that. So definitely food for thought.
Okay, thank you. Ray, let me reformulate the question here a little bit in the interest of time so that we can get to everything. Manuel brings up an interesting topic, which I alluded to, but I'll rephrase it and perhaps ask you to address this one portion of the question. Generally, I would say most of us think that photovoltaic power is a great thing. Obviously, the devil's in the details. The question that I would ask you to approach is, has the process that the Sea Ranch has followed to study the solar array been adequate, or should it be revisited? Manuel brought up that perhaps other sites could be re-evaluated. My understanding is that a number of sites were evaluated. Or has the amount of study and analysis been adequate in your opinion? I think that's at the core of the question. Do we back up here? Do we back up here, re-examine what's been going on, or has the study and analysis to date, is that still valid? Ray?
Sure. Looking at the study analysis, I was pretty impressed as the multiple issues that they have looked at. I have not received, you know, the feedback from the members as to how they feel emotionally about this. They have looked at it as in terms of environmental wetlands. They have looked at issues with PG&E. They have looked at the ownership of the property and what kind of ownership is the property in. Apparently there were some issues about whether, property that is Sea Ranch property as an association or as a Sea Ranch as a corporation, etc., that would impact the ability to develop into a solar array project. But let's step back. I mean, we're talking about generating power for the association. I did a similar project for South San Francisco, and we wanted to generate power. So in order to look at it, we looked at solar, we looked at wind, and we looked at fuel cell because we had a treatment plant and we had a lot of methane, and there were a lot of grants available for that. So solar arrays is the easiest and most cost-effective way to approach this. However, there's some issues involved that we have to look at closely. For example, if you generate power, you cannot cross a public property. If you want to cross a public property with the solar power or whatever power you generate, you have to be designated as a utility and you come under the CPUC jurisdiction. The way that they approach a solar array, I think, is very comprehensive. And I'd like to look at it a little bit more in terms of the mitigation for the wetlands, issues with PG&E and ownership, I think is a good start for our project. But if we want to look at the whole thing, I think we look at other types of power generation as well. Solar being number one, but there are other methods available. And we have to involve the membership and give them more information about where we headed, as well as looking at the approvals from the permitting agencies, as well as PG&E. PG&E is a big power player here.
Yeah. Gina, what are your thoughts? Gina, you'll need to unmute.
In the interest of time, I'll try to sort of narrow them down because I think Manuela and Ray have said things that I think as well. I don't know the order that this was done. In other words, did you look at the land first? Look at the, obviously solar was picked as the energy to look at. Obviously you can say that finding ways to create efficient and stable and sufficient energy for the future is just a good thing. Having maybe worked on a number of solar financings, now those are in a portfolio context and securitized, and this is a single array. But a lot of the ways of looking at them have become more standardized because there's been so many over the last 5 years. So I think, to me, understanding is that the highest and best use of that land, given that it is a good goal and that this may be the best way versus a PPA to address some of these additional power needs. So I think I haven't seen any models, for determining that. So I might be speaking ignorantly, but to me, I'd like to understand that.
Thanks, Gina. Chris, your thoughts?
I think this is another opportunity for the community to really model our values, right? If we want to live lightly on the land, we could have solar as a way of decreasing our carbon footprint. That's been a long-term goal for the community, for the board, as well in particular. For those that don't know, I've spent years, about 10, 12, 13 years working in renewable energy, most of that in solar. I was part of a small group, half dozen or so, negotiated one of the largest PPAs at about 250 megawatts back in 2007, a deal with PG&E. So I really believe we can change the way the world is powered. I drank the Kool-Aid. Many of my clients are still in renewable energy, but that doesn't mean I'm in favor.
Chris, for our viewers, would you explain that term PPA? Gina also used it.
Yeah, PPAs are power purchase agreements. Right. It's a tool where a utility can buy the output and pay the owner of the equipment a certain amount based upon the number of megawatts or kilowatt hours. But all that said does not mean I'm rubber stamping this. Far from it. What it really means is I have some industry experience and know the appreciate the importance of due diligence, viability, financeability, all of those things. So TBD, lots of questions others have already raised we need to answer. I do think the task force and the energy subcommittee have done a really terrific job, comprehensive job looking at other sites. Now the focus is on really the details, right? We need to know whether that site is viable. So the board authorized spending some money to do the permitting work to see if we can actually use that, the environmental work. We need an actual design and tools. What are the panels we're going to use? What product? What rating? Is it 650 panels? Is it 600 panels? Is it 700 panels? You know, we need the design of the system. And, you know, I just want to go back, as I said, I really do appreciate the value of member and in particular neighborhood input on this process. I'd like to see what this would look like. What I haven't seen yet, I believe, are the storyboards. You know, when somebody's building a home in a neighborhood, the homeowners, the contractors put up 2x4s sticking up into the air so you can really see where's the foundation, what are the corners of the building, what's the profile, how big is this bulk? And, you know, let's take a look at that. I think, you know, our neighbors deserve our effort to really appreciate what's the impact of putting it, you know, where we've cited or proposed. And understanding the mitigation, right? You know, I mentioned earlier, I wasn't excited about having a trail in my neighborhood, but the board at the time, the planning committee, the trails committee, you know, they heard my concerns and they made some adjustments. I love that trail today, honestly. If anybody's on social media, I've got a great picture of the rain coming down the waterfall at the end of that trail. Highly recommended the Sea Forest Trail. It's one of my favorites today. So I think going through this process, doing the diligence, getting the answers and talking to the neighbors, I think we'll come up with a good solution.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Scott, you've
just a quick
been-
segue to you, Chris. The thing that also you mentioned, and that area has been already subject to other construction projects like Tank 8 or other things. And I think the neighbors, and I live near the airport, and I've been speaking with people, have been unfairly subject to disturbances already. So I think imposing this on them needs to be discussed. I mean, we need to be, again, building the fabric of this community, building the decreasing polarization and trying to just put yourself in the shoes of the other person, you know. And I think that I would like to emphasize again that, and I'm glad you have that experience with the industry, that by not building a solar array, if that's what the community decides, and purchasing power from clean off-site facilities, we're not turning our back to our responsibility. As in fact, it could be even a better approach, because these are experienced facilities in generating clean power that we can buy, predict the cost and the rates, play to our advantage. I know Chris knows all about this, but at the same time, there is no upfront cost, there is no investment, we're not responsible, we're just buying the power. We don't put something there that pilots and reflections and all those things. So
yeah, Manuel, absolutely. I totally agree. It's important to have that conversation with our neighbor. We should be good neighbors to each other, right? That number one on my list in terms of priorities. And you raise a good point. I mean, there's the alternative. And I want to say, we are shifting to that alternative. I firmly believe in living our values, right? I run my business as a for-profit public benefit or benefit corp, and I turn a percentage of my own revenue back into the community to support it. I fully believe that. We should do our part for the community, for the environment. And so when we started having these discussions at the board again, late last fall, I reached out to staff and I said, hey, where are we buying our power today? Are we signed up for Sonoma Clean Power's 100% renewable? No, we're not. Why not? Was my question. You know, if this is important and this is one of the rationales for why we're looking at a solar array, say, shouldn't we be buying renewable? I mean, it's literally as simple as click here. I've done that at home. It's easy.
The first thing I've done, Chris, when I arrived here is to pay the extra for Sonoma Generation Clean Power. And I was surprised that the Sea Ranch is not already on a power purchase agreement. You know, Apple, Google, Amazon.
Well, I don't know if we need a
power.
I don't know that we need a complex power purchase agreement. I mean, that can get pretty sophisticated to put in place. Maybe.
Why don't
we will have
why don't we
renewable clean energy supplying our power starting with the beginning of this next fiscal year at a cost of, are you ready for this? Like a penny per day per member.
Perfect.
So win-win. Whether or not we have a solar array, we're going to have renewable energy.
Yes, that's the issue, regardless.
Scott, I don't think we've heard from you on this. Would you like to No, we haven't. Would you like to comment, add, elaborate, disagree, whatever?
Let me see if I can elaborate. I kind of jotted down some notes, and hopefully I'll kind of hit on some of the salient points. So, you know, I think I agree with what Chris is saying, right? If we do this, this is living our values, right? I mean, putting in a photovoltaic system gets us closer to our goal of, you know, eliminating carbon emissions and you know, getting us more towards a sustainable environment and doing our part, right? And if you look at what's going on at the state and the county levels, right? I mean, they are all declaring a climate emergency, right? I mean, it's pedal to the metal to try to do everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint. And you know, if the association argues about these things for years, we are going to be behind the power curve, as pilots like to say. So let's talk about this project a bit. So there's been 4 committees that have considered this. It started, you know, this is an operations part, right? I mean, we've done these already. We know how to do them. It started as the Solar Array Task Force. The Solar Array Task Force started with a list of potential properties where this could go. There are some intricate issues that we have to work around with PG&E in the state legislation about where it can actually go in contiguous properties on the Sea Ranch. We have to be able to have PG&E build the infrastructure for us to interconnect. And there was a matrix of a large number of sites, and those were worked through, and they were worked through with the planning committee. And so between those two, a large number of them, well, all of them except for the airport site, were eliminated for one reason or another, whether it was habitat, whether it was with the airport site. The design committee's been involved with this. And so, you know, we've had meetings with the public. The design committee actually had drawings. They actually have some images of what this would actually look like when it's built out. The public was invited to come look at it. This has been all transparent. It's been out in the open, right? And so we've gotten now to the point where it's arrived at the finance committee. I mean, this is what the committee structure does at the Sea Ranch, and these are the things that we do. And so now the finance committee is vetting it, and our first contractor that we were engaged with on this solar craft, who we've worked with before, the finance committee threw up some red flags in terms of the financing part of that. And we now, through one of our members that's on the finance committee and on the utilities committee and the energy subcommittee of the utilities committee, is very, very engaged in this. It's what he does for a living. And he brought us another subcontractor who's taken a look at it with a you know, fresh set of eyes. And we're going to have, I think, a much better financial outlook going forward. And we brought them in to look at some other projects for us as well. So, you know, in terms of the process, I think the process has gone right. Yeah, I mean, I share the concerns that have been raised. You know, it's a horrible thing that the poor airport site is the thing that keeps ending up as, you know, where we do projects. But right now that site basically has about 4 feet of trailings sitting on top of it that were pulled out from the Tank 8 construction. And this project will clean that area back up. What's being proposed, the solar panels will be bermed so that they're not going to be visible. And that came about through working with the neighbors there that raised the concerns that, you know, it's like, hey, we don't want to see these. And, you know, I probably wouldn't want to either. And so that's how the berming came about, and it inflated the cost. But, you know, as we do things at Sea Ranch, we do things for the greater good of the Sea Ranch, and we try to mitigate the impacts to people around it. Like Chris was saying, you know, when he raised concerns about the trail by his house, they were addressed. And I think the design committee has tried to address the concerns of the neighbors about there as best as we can, and live with a site that was selected to be the site that we can do this and achieve the goals that we had in offsetting the electrical consumption at our recreation sites. And like I said, it's living our values, and it gets us closer to being, carbon neutral.
Well, I think to live our values, it's also, again, it's being smart, and it's buying the power where, I mean, why do we have to become generators ourselves if we can support a growing industry that provides the same, benefit in terms of and more predictability? Now, two, berm, yeah, we don't see it, birds will see it. I've heard about the lake effect. Birds are known to land on solar panels thinking it's water and they get fried up. I mean, I wouldn't like to see that when I'm taking my walk. So people sensitive also to how wildlife gets impacted by a fairly large social array. It just needs to be considered, and we need to consult experts about things like that. So there is a lot of issues and questions here. But I think it's just not an either or is solar and we're doomed and we're not supporting sustainable energy. We are. There are other options. And the first one should be reevaluating Verdant View if we want to go solar, because solar panels are best placed in roofs when possible, so there is a new building maybe being built there, but we can examine that. There is that whole storage area. There is connectivity there. I was walking that facility with Roland Pesch the other day, and I learned that actually it was discarded for inaccurate reasons, and I think that because we're left with the airport, oh, poor airport, let's keep beating the airport. That's not a good reason to do it in the airport, just because we don't have any other option but the port airport. So I think that, again, there are tons of questions, but I think we all agree, and we need to be very clear that we're not turning our back to clean energy. We are all supporting that. And there are other ways to offset carbon than being us, the generators of our own power. That sounds great, but it's full of problems too.
Manuel, I'm going to interrupt you here in the interest of time. We've heard a lot of great opinions there on the solar array. Thank you, candidates. Time-wise, we're kind of near what I wanted when we wanted to wrap up. I think we'll hold. I have a few questions that I don't think we'll get to. I may reach out to you all individually and see if we want to reconvene at some other point, if we want to attempt something. There's obviously a lot to discuss here, and I want to leave some time for each of you to make a summary statement. So we're going to stay more or less within our 2 hours. So I would ask each one of you, I'm going to ask you to limit this to a minute, please. Once again, why should you be a board member? Why should the Sea Ranchers consider voting for you? Scott, why don't you respond, and we'll just work around.
Sure. So first off,
1 minute, please.
1 minute. Yes, I will do it in a minute. Maybe. I want to thank everyone for listening to the conversation today. Elections are important. One of the traits that I've always admired about the Sea Ranch is the engagement of the membership. I think we tend to be more highly engaged than other cities. I know it's difficult to decide who to vote for, especially if you're unfamiliar with the candidates. And many times in previous elections, I had to call Sea Ranchers that I knew and trusted to get insight into candidates, because frankly, I didn't know them. I want to make it clear, I'm not a single issue candidate. I don't have any political agenda. I don't even have all the answers to the pressing issues. I know my limitations, and I know when to seek out advice and counsel, and to do the necessary research to make an informed decision. My wife knows kind of firsthand how much time I spend and spend on Sea Ranch board meetings in the past and committee meetings now. I believe strongly in our history of self-reliance. I want to see us create a sustainable community for the next generations of Sea Ranchers. I welcome to talking with members about the issues. I've got a website up, it's scott@searanch.info. You can send me questions to my email and I will write up responses and they'll be there. My interests are serving in the community. My knowledge of the Sea Ranch and the water company go back almost 20 years. I believe that makes me an asset. Someone actually pointed out to me, if elected to the board, I would have the longest institutional knowledge of any sitting board member. So with that, I respectfully ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Ray, would you care to give us 1 minute and summarize why you'd make a good board member?
Sure. Well, I just want to thank you first, George. This is good. I mean, I learned a lot through this interaction and getting to know other potential candidates. But my background, civil engineering, and working for the cities in infrastructure, I hope that I could be some help to the board member and whoever's working on these infrastructure. I hope that I could be of some value doing some feasibility studies and giving my background, provide some knowledge in certain areas. What I would like to see is if I elected as board member, that I like to see a board putting the emphasis on what our values are. It's good to look at the feasibility and all the proposals, but the value of Sea Ranch and the founding fathers should come foremost in any kind of decision. So that's what I'm standing for. That's why I bought into the Sea Ranch idea, and that's what I'd like to see it, in the next decades and 50, 100 years from now. To whatever we do now, that's where the rotation is going to come through. Thank you.
Thank you. Gina? Nope, you'll need to unmute again. Sorry.
You might be happier if I didn't unmute, but I think that,
Yeah.
to me at least, the Sea Ranch is somewhat in a period of transition. Some global events that force transition on us, as well as decisions we've made individually and collectively as a community. And I think it's a very important time and requires a lot of thought and consideration of things that are present and that will have consequences for actions we take today. I do believe that the philosophy and values of the Sea Ranch that were put in place decades ago still can work, and they can continue to work. And I think if you do stay true to them, you'll make things work better in the face of some of the issues, whether they're climate change or even how association members interact with one another, given that the Sea Ranch is built out now for all intents and purposes. And what does that mean versus what it was decades ago? So I think I'm excited about that opportunity if I were elected. And I think I would be good at some of the things that are required, given my background. I'd say, especially in finance, what I had to do was always solution-based and figuring out something from a set of factors and implications in order to come up with sort of a reasoned response. So I would hope I could apply those skills and that experience to being a board member. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Gina. Manuel, in a minute, tell us why we should think about you as a board member.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, well, I think as we all know, I mean, the Sea Ranch is facing some important decisions. And I think at this point, the board should have this diversity of the old and the new to make these decisions. I think that that's important. When I started this campaign, I said, oh, I'm gonna have to collect testimonials here from people and to kind of vouch for my experience. And I started thinking, oh, well, I'm gonna call up Julia Roberts and Woody Harrelson, and I'm gonna call Bob Weir, because these are people that have financed my environmental projects. And then I say, wait, hold on. Those are not the celebrities that I want to call upon. Because for me, the celebrities are the plants and the animals, the seals and all, and the neighbors. Those are the celebrities that I want to work with, that I want to actually call upon to say, hey guys, we face a bright future. I think this place can be a showcase to the world of a community that is doing things in energy, in forest conservation, in the regulation of rentals, in just making sure that everybody that has a lot here comes back to the place that they think they're going to come back to, not to another place that has changed so dramatically. So to me, living lightly with the land is also living lightly with each other. I mean, I place an enormous value in community. I'm an anthropologist. I care for the social fabric of this place, to reduce tension, to increase sense of humor, to just have a light touch with each other, to be kind with each other. Because I think when you live lightly with the land, naturally, that's where you come to. And I think that I don't want a beautiful land if I have to be in a bad mood all day, and vice versa. I don't mean to be a great mood in the middle of a parking lot in somewhere. So I think those are where my values are. And I think I can, and will work to make this a great closing to my environmental career. I'll be proud if I can join the board and I ask for your vote, and we can make these decisions that will make sure that we continue living lightly with the land and with each other.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to take a minute and tell us why we should consider you?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, I would ask for members' votes so that I can continue the work that I've done. I strongly embrace the values and the principles, of our community, the ethos. Try to live those principles in my own practice, in my own life, as I've said. I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from several of our really outstanding contributors in the community, chatting with Donald Linden about his work from the beginning, or Susan Clark and her efforts to capture the history of this community, Debbie Tyler and all the planning work that she's done, and so many others really influence, how I approach this really terrific place. It's unique. And as I've said, we really need to preserve, protect it for future generations, but we also need to prepare it, right? There are some challenges ahead. We face them every day, whether they're staffing issues or community engagement or a pandemic, right? There are a lot of things that come up. And we really do need to focus on the future and what our members of the future will want and what will they appreciate. And frankly, it's not lost on me that, looking around the candidates here today and my fellow board members, I'm probably 10, 20, 30 years younger compared to some of my peers on the board or folks here. And I'm keenly aware of the need to make sure that some of our newest members in the community, right, folks who are those, young families here, working adults, folks with young families and children, that they have a stake at the table, right? So I'm very mindful of that and thinking, how do we engage them, right? I shouldn't be the only person, on the board or volunteering in leadership roles or involved in committees under 50, right? Or the only person who might still be working. I know some of my peers are still working on the board, of course, but we should see more. We need to figure out, how do we get in that next generation engaged? I think that's going to be really our biggest challenge. How do we transfer the mantle to the next set of folks who are going to be leading this community? And that's a conversation I'd really like to participate in as a board member and as a member of this community. So I would humbly ask for some votes to make sure that I can serve another 3 years in that role.
Thank you, Chris. That's going to conclude today's candidates forum. We have a number of other topics we could have explored. We may explore those in a future forum if we can put that together, but I do want to thank each of the candidates who took a few hours out of their Saturday here with all of us. And I'd like to just real quickly reintroduce each candidate just visually. Scott Nevin, running for board. Scott. Chris Japp, give us a wave, Chris. Gina Hubble. Ray Razavi. And Manuel Alonso Martinez. I want to thank each of you. Thank you all for running and for participating in this way. And I want to thank all of you viewers out there. And please be sure and vote.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.